The first Minnesota Vikings depth chart is out, and even though it's unofficial, I know you all yearn for it, you filthy, filthy mongrels, and I'm going to indulge you. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, each and every day. I appreciate you all so very much. My hashtag everydayers, those of you who were with me all summer long, all throughout the Everyman series, which is we've only got a couple players left for, as well as now through camp in the season. If you're new here, hello and welcome. Welcome to the 2024 season. You can find the show wherever you find your favorite podcast. Just search out Locked On Vikings anywhere you listen to shows, including YouTube or even Amazon Fire and Roku if you download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. It's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Today on the show, we're going over the first depth chart of the 2024 season. The Vikings are back at camp. Had a little weather delay, missed the night practice, so if you did have plans to take the family out for the night practice on Monday and it got rained out, I'm sorry to you. Not much you can do about it, I guess. But they were back on Tuesday, full pads. Lewis Seen is working back in. It's ostensibly, Andrew Van Ginkel should be working back in, but I haven't heard anything about that one way or another. So hopefully the Vikings are getting a little bit healthier, with Jerry Tillery also hopefully working his way back in as well. Had to get stitches on getting cleated, but that's a short-term thing. And the Vikings released their first unofficial depth chart. So here is what I think we can do. I think we can build a 53-man roster based off of this depth chart. I know it's an unofficial depth chart, all right, but look, the unofficial is just leaving them open to change their mind on things based on preseason and stuff like that as well. I think it is at least communicating to us pole position in camp battles that are not over, but it's just telling us where things are right now, and everything is subject to change and nothing is unofficial, right? Maybe we can try to glean some nuggets out of it, even though we understand that it's all a big grain of salt. For example, if you look at the quarterbacks, the starter is Sam Darnold. We all expected that. If you are just showing up, by the way, to the Vikings and you're wondering what that's about, Sam Darnold, he's the bridge quarterback. He's slated to start week 1. JJ McCarthy, very much in the lab, working on mechanics, working on getting on reading the playbook concepts out on time. He can very clearly read them out, but sometimes it's slow in a way that the drills don't really know how to punish. So he'll still throw a touchdown, but it's like, that was so late, that would never happen. But has also shown enough really exciting flashes where we can be super, super stoked on him while still understanding that we're not getting this dude tomorrow. So that's in the slow cooker. That's going to happen. But what's interesting is that they listed JJ McCarthy or Nick Mullins as backups, rather than the way that they'll do this, like with the running backs, where it is listed, there's no or. Everybody's in a clear pecking order. Aaron Jones, Ty Chandler, Kene Nwangwu, Myles Gaskin, Dwayne McBride, right? Like clear pecking order. And by the way, I think you keep 3 of those guys, you cut Gaskin and McBride, and then you're done. So what does it tell us? That, McCarthy and Mullins maybe are in this like or world. And I think what that implies, at least where they're at right now, they had to play a game tomorrow, it'd be Sam Darnold starting. And if Sam Darnold got hurt, it implies that they're willing to still put Nick Mullins in over JJ McCarthy, as to not re-engage him in old habits that he's still kind of reverting back to when things get going a little bit too fast. You don't want to put him in a full game scenario where the speed of the game is never going to let him take a break and rest and sort of reconfigure all the habits he's trying to build, right? It would break those habits, and we've seen that happen a million times. Justin Fields, Bryce Young, the list goes on. You would put Nick Mullins in. There's actually a mailbag question yesterday of somebody that was like, yeah, I wanted, that's what I want. Am I crazy? And the answer was definitely not crazy. That I think is the plan. However, JJ McCarthy is going to be taking second team reps as something to help his development and stuff. So does that mean he would go in second in a real live situation? Not sure still. Not sure that's best for him. Or it just implies that for somebody who started out as QB3, he's climbed that far up the depth chart now. He's starting to crack at QB2, and now it's a QB2 is a 50-50 thing, and QB1 is next. Whatever it is, it still gives us the sense that there's a timeline that we are not at the end of. But again, enough really cool stuff in camp that when this whole puzzle is put together, we get to be very excited about what it says. So either way, that also implies that Jaren Hall is probably the QB getting cut right now. Preseason will have a lot to say about that, but if they made the decision now, it would be Darnold, McCarthy, Mullins. It would be Aaron Jones, Ty Chandler, Kenny Nwangwu, CJ Ham in the running back positions. That gives us our 4 running backs. Wide receivers, of course, your starters are Jefferson and Addison. Backups, Jalen Naylor and Brandon Powell. I think the distinction is really funny when they use an or and they use an and, right? I guess with wide receiver, it's just that there's it's a duo. This is listed in 21 personnel, so there'd be 2 receivers on the field. So your first team would be Jefferson, Addison. Your second team, Powell and Naylor. Naylor's exploding at camp. Powell appears to be doing totally fine. Interesting to me, Tristan Jackson is next, and he's alone. In these depth charts, they will often do it by pairs. They'll do Jefferson and Addison, Powell and Naylor, Tristan Jackson and whoever the next guy is. But Tristan Jackson is alone, comfortably wide receiver 5. Doesn't that kind of imply a 5 wide receiver plan? I don't know. Maybe I'm reading way too much. I'm probably reading way too much into that. And guys like Jayshon Jones and Trent Sherfield, who are next up, that's lower than I thought Trent Sherfield would be, higher than I thought Jayshon Jones would be. Maybe he's a guy that he's somebody the beat writers have called out in the last couple of days, as well as somebody who's starting to flash a little bit more consistently. Maybe he is actually working his way onto this roster. When we did his Everyman series, we kind of said, hey, this guy's a long shot to make the roster, but the door is absolutely open. Go ball out at camp, and it's not like there is this really super established group of veterans that you're never going to be able to knock off like there is at, say, off-ball linebacker. It's a little harder for an undrafted free agent to make it because the group right now is veteran and it's all incumbents, and it's not quite that way at wide receiver. And here we are, Jayshon Jones working his way up, being listed as wide receiver 6 or 7. Will they keep a wide receiver 6 is the big question. So for now, let's say that it's just 5, and let's say that Trent Sherfield and Jayshon Jones are not the ones making it. That brings us to the tight ends. You've still got TJ Hawkinson listed as the starter, although he's on PUP. So you have Josh Oliver, Johnny Munt, Nick Muse. That's your next 3. These are, again, it's 21 personnel. So there's only one tight end here, so they're not listed in pairs or anything like that. So there's a clear pecking order. And after those 3 on the pecking order, it's Robert Tonyan, then N'Keal Harry, then Trey Knox, and Sammis Reyes. So I think you keep 3 of these guys while you wait for TJ Hawkinson to come back. And then maybe TJ Hawkinson just becomes the 4th tight end and you cut somebody else, or maybe you still go with 3. I think it just depends on a lot of their run strategy and what that actually ends up being. But Josh Oliver being listed above Johnny Munt is, I think, a little instructive. How you define who the starter and the backup will be with no Hawkinson in the game is a little bit sketchy, because Josh Oliver is a more established player that the Vikings have more committed to. They're paying him more than they're paying Munt, and they've kind of lauded him as a more key central piece of the offense than Johnny Munt. But Johnny Munt might end up taking all the tight end reps from 11 personnel, or maybe he won't, and maybe that's what this depth chart is telling us. I'm not quite sure. Either way, I think both guys are pretty easy to make the team, and then it's, you'll probably keep a 3rd, at least for now, and that guy right now figures to be Nick Muse. Offensive line, pretty chalk here. You got Christian Darrisaw, Brian O'Neill. Your backup tackles, Walter Rouse and David Quessenberry. You also have Jeremy Flax and Doug Nestor in your 3rd team. Those guys, long shots to make the roster, but pretty good odds for the practice squad, just to kind of have that extra bit of depth in the building. And then on the interior, Brandel, Bradbury, Ingram, really no competition to speak of. A lot of people speculated that there would be one. There isn't one, unless you really, really, really want to make it up just because O'Connell said that, Reisner was there to push some guys. But that was this is one quote, and they haven't really followed through on that at all. So I don't really think that you can give that. I think Reisner's just a backup, and that's just the way it is. The other 2 backups on the interior, Michael Juergens listed as a left guard, and Dan Feeney listed as a center. So very interesting, because those 2 guys both play guard and center. And in my opinion, they're in conflict with each other for a roster spot for the swing backup to play both roles. So which one is listed at what is probably what they're going to play more of in the preseason, but I would also anticipate seeing those 2 guys both play both positions as they kind of compete for one, call it a utility role on the O-line. And then behind them, Tyrese Robinson, Henry Bird, Spencer Rolland, who's moving from tackle to guard. All pretty big long shots, but there's your threes, I guess. Tyrese Robinson did start with the twos, by the way, and Juergens overtook him. So there's also something for that. We'll go to the defensive side of things, and then we'll have an entry into the Everyman series next up on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Gametime, the best place to find last-minute tickets to anything. So if you're thinking about maybe getting out to a Twins game while the weather is nice, the one day it is sunny in Minnesota this summer, I guess, and you're waiting for the weather and the clouds breaking, you go, let's do it. Let's go to a baseball game. Check out Gametime. You'll be able to find tickets even up to the very start of the event, even an hour into the start of the game. You can still find them there. And it's not just sporting events. It's anything, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever you want. Even NFL games. It's not just for last minute either. It's very good at saving you up to 60% by buying last minute. But if you want to get out ahead of things and get, say, your tickets to the season opener, the home opener for against the 49ers, or maybe if you live in New York, the season opener over there in Meadowlands, or New Jersey, I guess, or the London game, or the home Packers game is always a big one. Whatever it is, you can find it all at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. When you are done with Locked On Vikings, if you're still craving some football content, check out Locked On Fantasy Football. I'm going to guess your draft is around the corner if you haven't already had it, and you're looking for that edge. So go let Vinny Iyer give it to you, and make sure you check that one out every day as well to keep that edge going throughout the season. Your coworkers will never see it coming. Next up, let's go to the defensive side of the depth chart here, the unofficial depth chart of the Minnesota Vikings. We'll start with the edge rushers. They call them outside linebackers. I refuse to do that. Your starters are still Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel, with your backups being listed as Pat Jones and Dallas Turner. I think that's the group, with maybe you keep a fifth one here if somebody really blows up. So Gabe Murphy has been a guy that people have really noticed more. This is also, beat writers maybe trying to will it to another Ivan Pace thing, but it does sound like he's genuinely done well. Jihad Ward is listed next to him. So there's your kind of third team. And then at the bottom of the roster, you have Owen Porter, Andre Carter, who does not appear to have taken the step that we thought he would after a year of NFL conditioning, and Bo Richter. Carter and Richter are both at the bottom there. They both look like they're about to get cut. On the interior of the defensive line, you have Jerry Tillery, Harrison Phillips, and Jonathan Bullard. Those are your three starters. That's pretty chalk. That's kind of what we expected going in. Behind them, you have James Lynch, Jaquelin Roy, and Jonah Williams. I think that's a keep two group. And then you have four-ish edge rushers, five in the middle. Maybe you do 5 and 5 if you want to keep 10. You cut an extra D-back or something like that. But I think there it is. Then you also have Levi Drake Rodriguez listed amongst the threes, alongside Taki Taimani and Jalen Redmond, with Tyler Manoa kind of taking up the rear with the fours. He'll be playing in the fourth quarter of that third preseason game, maybe one of those kind of guys trying to find a practice squad slot somewhere. But Levi Drake Rodriguez is another interesting one. A lot of these guys have been going in with the ones, and on defense, who is playing with the ones, twos, and threes is a lot less clear because Brian Flores really rotates guys around a lot. You really, not in the same way you've got your offensive first team and your offensive second team, and it's very clear cut because I think on offense that chemistry is a little more important than it is on defense, where sometimes it's just go ball. On offensive line, right? You're not going to do a lot of rotation on offensive line unless you have a true blue camp battle, but which the Vikings don't have any of those. So you've seen Levi Drake Rodriguez with the ones. You've seen Jaquelin Roy go with the ones, even though he's on the twos and stuff. You've seen these guys kind of rotate around and compete with each other. But I do think that you'll have it's a keep 9 or 10 kind of group. In your off-ball linebackers, your inside linebackers, you've got Blake Cashman and Ivan Pace up top. That's kind of to be expected. Then Kamu Grugier-Hill and Brian Asamoah second. And then the only other guys are Dallas Gant and Jabril Cox. There's your threes. Those guys I think are going to have a tough time cracking that roster. Now, Jabril Cox has made teams before. He is a perfectly rosterable player. And I think if Brian Asamoah does get cut, it sounds like he's been having a pretty good camp. So he's making a case for himself. But obviously it's got to show up in the preseason. But if he does end up totally cut, getting hurt he was hurt all last year in the preseason, if I recall. I think that really hurt him. But But if he like struggles in the preseason and Jabril Cox plays well, I think that's like absolutely an avenue for somebody to like lose a job. And there's going to be real stakes on that in those games when they go to Vegas for this first one. Then we have the cornerbacks. Oh, baby. It's always an interesting group. So your starters are listed as Shaq Griffin and Byron Murphy. By the way, this is listed in base personnel, so you only have 2 starters listed as cornerbacks. Your backups, your next 2 guys are Caleb Evans and Fabian Moreau. This jives with what we have seen with Shaq Griffin out when they are in nickel. It has been Byron Murphy, Caleb Evans, and Fabian Moreau with Byron Murphy on the inside. So there you go. Byron Murphy on the field all the time. Shaq Griffin probably on the field all the time. And then Caleb Evans and Fabian Moreau are your guys rotating in. And then after that, you have Andrew Booth Jr., A.J. Green, and Jacoby Francis all listed. Jacoby Francis is a little higher than I thought he would be. He is very much like a perennial practice squad duder. But also, same with A.J. Green. And Andrew Booth, to be honest with you, all listed above. This is like kind of above guys with way more hype, like Duke Shelley and Dwight McGlothern. And of course, Najee Thompson is he's going to be on reserve pup, but he's also listed at the bottom of this. And you know, as a special teamer, it's a different thing. But Booth being listed a little bit higher, they're really giving him every chance in the world to prove himself. Now Tyler, who's been on here as a kind of camp correspondent, has told me that the demise of Andrew Booth is maybe a little exaggerated. He's on the wrong end of a few highlights, but we don't want to get highlight syndrome, you know, like he's had other good reps as well that just don't get posted by the social media team. So maybe he is just like beating that, but AJ Green being higher than I thought, Jacoby Francis being higher than I thought, that kind of CB5, CB6 position to me, wide open. Pick your favorite 2. And it might not be, you know, Dwight McGlothern and Duke Shelley, who I think are the fan favorites for that. Safeties, of course, you have Harrison Smith and Cam Bynum. Then your backups are Josh Metellus and Theo Jackson. And then, again, interestingly, Jay Ward and Lewis Seen listed above Bobby McCain, big-time Flores guy, but also new to the team. And Lewis Seen, who worked back in. I didn't hear anything about him one way or another for his first day back. Sounds like they're still kind of easing him in, so I don't know if he got that much work. But they're going to try to have him back playing on Saturday against the Raiders. So that's going to be one that I watch very closely, is how Lewis Seen does against the Raiders there in Las Vegas. And, of course, your kickers are pretty chalk. Your specialists, Will Reichard, Ryan Wright above Seth Vernon, De Paolo, of course, and then your kickoff returner is going to be Wongwu with Ty Chandler and Brandon Powell also doing that. Your punt returner is Brandon Powell, same thing as last year. So if we want to like pare that down into a 53-man roster, we actually do have room to keep a 6th wide receiver. I obviously don't have time to go over the whole thing with you right now, but obviously there's some like really interesting stuff going on here. I actually did a 53-man roster on Patreon at patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL that pretty much reflects this depth chart with a couple of things that maybe I'm already looking like I'm going to get wrong or whatever, but you can go check that out if you're a patron. For everybody else, let's move on to the Everyman series centering on Levi Drake Rodriguez. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by LinkedIn. If you are in charge of hiring, you have to be on LinkedIn. Of course you do. Whether it's a small business that you run or you just have a role that means you do hiring, like an HR role or something like that, you got to be on LinkedIn. Because LinkedIn, it's not just a job board. It's basically a social media that everyone uses. There are like 70% of LinkedIn users aren't on any other job websites. So if you're not on LinkedIn, you're missing out on a huge portion of the talent pool. 2.5 small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring, and 86% of those small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Use all of their tools, like generative tools to help you write a better job, like a better blurb for your job description, as well as tools that can help you pare down impossibly large pools of candidates like the one that is on LinkedIn Jobs. They can help you kind of narrow that down and not be overwhelmed by numbers as well. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Every year, around 6-7 of the draft, most of us that are still just kind of sitting there talking about Dallas Turner and JJ McCarthy, we're kind of burned out on it. We're going, who are these guys, these small town dudes? But those actual players and their friends and their families will be in these draft parties completely holding their breath. And I want to paint the picture for you. Most of the information from this for this segment came from the Athletic series of Prospect X articles, where they go over like a small school or an overlooked prospect, a lot of their pre-draft process and their story and stuff, a lot of the stuff that's perfect for the Everyman series, but without naming them, so you don't get bogged down in the name recognition and the kind of stigma that will come with whatever school they play for or whatever. And this time it was Levi Drake Rodriguez. So we got a great look into this moment in his life, this incredibly this like pivotal crossroads of will I or will I not get drafted? Where am I going to live next year? It's going to say on the TV. And all my friends and family are here. Packed like sardines into a 980-foot square house in square foot house in Georgetown, Texas. This is not the first time that this house has been packed to the gills with people. It is, despite its small house, it is something of a gathering spot for all the neighborhood kids all the way growing up. It's like a nostalgic thing. They all have a sleepover the night before. They're all like laughing and giggling with each other, even though they're all full-grown adults now. It's like they're all 12 again. And then they all hold their breath for about an hour while the 6th and 7th round go by. In Levi Drake Rodriguez's bedroom, and it followed him to all like his dorm rooms and stuff, there's a whiteboard, as there is in so many of these stories. Everybody's got a whiteboard that they wrote on when they were 8 years old. And this is an ADHD 8-year-old with a huge appetite and a desire to tackle and roughhouse with everybody. So yeah, we're getting that kid in football. He writes, "I will be a professional football player, ! In Jesus' name, ! That's what he wrote as an 8-year-old. And he carried that whiteboard around, never erased it, carried it around with him through all of the stops in this journey. But that little 980 square foot house was much too small for a child like this. So this was the kind of kid that would like get kicked out for the afternoon. You go burn off energy. You can come back when you're less hyper because you're going to break everything in this house. They would call them, so their parents called them sports poor, where, all of our money is going into sports stuff and supporting the kids, the kids and their youth sports and all their dreams and stuff. And that's going to be what we have. We got the money to do that, but we don't have the money to do anything else. Levi Drake shared a single room with his sister. But again, everybody hung out there anyways, even though it was small and cramped. It was small, but it's got a lot of love. That's the way they would say it. But in high school, he was kind of like a skinny offensive tackle. He hadn't moved to D-line yet, and he didn't get any major offers. So he ended up at a nearby Southwestern Assemblies of God University, now known as Nelson University, a like really strict Bible school nearby in Texas, in Waxahachie, Texas. And one of the things that got him there he's a lineman, right? Big dude, like big behemoth of a man, right? He's skinny for an 18-year-old, but he's on a recruiting visit and he's still like a big football player, dunking a basketball and like having the jumps, the ups to do that. And they're like, we need this kid. I can make a D tackle out of this kid. If he can dunk a basketball and at that size, he's got the power, he's got the explosion in his thighs, I can do it. It's like such a defensive line coach mentality. And it was there that he really came into his own, both as a man and as a football player. They originally put him at edge, and there they called him a wild wire edge rusher. That really, he needed to be honed. He was raw as hell. But he had the motor and he had the work ethic, and soon enough he would be the stud of the team. But he also really grew as a teammate and as a leader. Levi Drake Rodriguez is a total sweetheart off the field. Big, cuddly, bear hug kind of guy. Mean as heck on the field, but when he's off the field, he's this like gentle giant sweetheart that you get the description of so many of these big guys, because everybody sees a big guy and expects him to be mean. I think it's a little bit of like a pandering stereotype, but it's the way that people talk about him. Very kind-hearted man. But he also has that leadership gene. There's this anecdote of him speaking at chapel at this Bible school, and talking about his experience and speaking from the heart and being really natural and being really honest and vulnerable. And he's talking to like hundreds of kids, including all of his teammates. 63 of his teammates after that speech will decide to get baptized. I have to imagine some of these kids haven't thought about spirituality at all, but he had just that compelling effect. The article kind of breezes by that. That is insane. That is so... like, to change the spiritual sensibilities of that many people in Texas, that's wild to me. So much, this happened, the coach canceled practice the next day so they could all do it. They're like, yeah, no, we won't. Everybody go to the pool. We're doing a baptism for everybody. By this point, he's realizing that he's good enough to play in the NFL, but nobody's going to come to Southwestern Assemblies of God. He's got to get into at least D2 to get a little bit of recognition. And that's where he starts sending out his tape to people, including Texas A&M Commerce, which is where he will ultimately end up. He sends his tape out there. They love it. They see how explosive he is. They say, oh my God, we can do something with this. But the thought of leaving is actually really hard on Levi Drake Rodriguez. He's really torn between this like chase my NFL dream, but also these teammates that I've grown so close with and the school I really like, and it matches my faith and all that. And so he fasts for a week to make this decision. Like, this is how pious this guy is. Like, he's fasting and praying on decisions in the same way you would think of like a Tibetan monk doing it. But there is a lot of overlap in a lot of the religions of the world, in that a lot of times communing on it, meditating on it, praying on it, whatever you want to call it, is really a way to handle a big decision. And so he will grab his Bible, he will fast for a week, and then he just sort of sits down and waits to hear the word from God. And the word from God tells him, you got to do it. You got to go. So off to Texas A&M Commerce he goes. Now, they were a D2 school when he enrolled. By the time he would graduate, they'd be D1. So he actually gets some D1 experience. And then the article goes over the kind of the scout's perspective, where every scout thinks that they found this diamond in the rough. And then like 8 teams show up to his pro day like, oh, you found him too. Like, they're all so excited about his tape from A&M Commerce Lions. Most of the Prospect X thing, it covers his pre-draft process and going through the combine and all that stuff. Not so much the life story. But he will have to gain a lot of weight because he's under 300 pounds. He's trying to play defensive tackle. So he's throughout the whole writing process of this, he's constantly eating. And the meals that these articles describe are absolutely insane. He's like an entire breakfast that I could probably finish half of. And then he's like, okay, bring me round 2. It's a big blue cheeseburger. He's putting down, like, when you're putting down like 6,000 calories a day or whatever it is, your body, it adapts to your diet. If you eat 6,000 calories a day, your body will start to want 6,000 calories a day. So on day 3 of the draft, when Levi wasn't sure he was going to get drafted, he's nervous, pits in his stomach, and he's so nervous all he can eat is a few chicken wings. You're going to feel that. And he felt really weird that whole day, but he was too anxious to eat. So cut back to this family and all of his friends. This group of, had to be like 40 people, all crammed into this little house, all huddled around the TV holding their breath. And, the rounds 4 and 5, we're all talking. We know he's probably not going to go that high, but soon we're partying, we're eating, we're having fun, we're joking, we're laughing. Round 6 starts, and then the conversations start to hush a little bit. By round 7, you can hear a pin drop. Mom's going into the other room and praying on it, like she can't handle the anxiety anymore. Then his phone rings, and it's, I think it was a 612 number. It's Kwesi, and he says, you want to be a Viking? And Levi Drake Rodriguez jumps out of his chair. He says, let's go. You can hear him on the draft call. He says, let's go. And the whole place erupts. People are jumping up and down. People are hugging. People are screaming. They said it like damn near tears this little house to the ground. This is so much commotion. And so there he goes. And I'm always compelled by these stories, especially people who don't come from the kinds of neighborhoods, the kinds of privilege where you can get to all the youth camps and get your name out there for big colleges and stuff. When you do just kind of have to do it on elbow grease and sending and emailing your A&M Commerce tape to some NFL people. And especially if Levi Drake Rodriguez makes the team. You want a story to root for in the preseason, by the way, watch Levi Drake Rodriguez. Because if he makes the team, the difference between the money he will make on the practice squad and the team is like a whole zero. Like, it is hundreds of thousands of dollars a year now. It is enough money to, if he wants, get his family out of that little house, upgrade everybody's lifestyle. Everybody's life will change that he wants to change if he makes the team and he makes even just 1 year of NFL rookie contract money. That is a story worth rooting for. But everybody's got a story like that, and everybody has their why. So we compete and we hash it out. I'll talk to y'all tomorrow, and as always, Skull.